All right. Wanted to continue the conversation about divorce. So I recorded a video with a friend of mine, and he requested that I not put the video up for good reason, and so I took it down. But I want to continue the conversation because it is a much needed conversation to continue. And this is specifically divorce in the church. And I would be open to talking to people, with people about this topic, so it's not just me, a talking head. But until that happens, it's apparently just going to be me. And I'm thinking about bringing my wife on to talk with me about it. I think that would be helpful. I just want to think about it a little bit more carefully. So we'll see. All right. So I wanted to recap the last video and then see where it goes from there. I don't think this will be very long because I want this to be multiple parts. But divorce in the church is something that we don't talk about. It's very hard to talk about, and for good reason. I mean, I was talking to my friend about it, and he loves talking about it one-on-one. He loves helping people through these types of problems. But as soon as you expand the audience beyond the one, it becomes very difficult because there's lots of things, lots of people, lots of ideas, conceptions, even like nasty stuff, lies, and whether or not somebody's going to make your life harder or more miserable or more expensive. So it's very hard to talk about for good reason. And I'm in this unique situation, less common situation, where I was very close to getting a divorce, filed for divorce, and then my wife and I worked it out. And so there's less of a risk in me talking about it because I don't have the consequences of a divorce to wrestle with, and yet I have all of most of the experiences leading up to a divorce that I can help people with. And I didn't realize this until I was talking to somebody more recently, but I was telling them my story, and they basically said, yeah, your story is like one in a million. A lot of people get divorces, but once you kind of start the process of divorce, it's very hard to recover from it because the process of divorce naturally pits you against each other. And so it's very hard to engage in a process that pits you against each other and then work out your differences and decide to overcome that situation. And so yeah, it's weird. It's I find myself in an interesting situation to be able to talk about it, and I really want to talk about it because I know how difficult it is. Okay. It's very hard to talk about in the church specifically because there's a lot of stuff revolving around families, eternal families, covenants, commitments, all of that stuff. It's a huge part of why it's so hard to talk about, and so I want to get into that eventually. Maybe not exactly this part. And if you're going to give advice on these topics of like family problems, it's very important to actually have experience in these issues. I don't know exactly why, but it's really hard for a man who's never been close to divorce to give advice to some man who is going through a divorce. Like you'd think that you'd be able to go to your bishop and say, I'm thinking about a divorce. Do you have any counsel for me? And the bishop would be able to say something really helpful. But most of the time they can't because they haven't been in that situation. And I can kind of relate to why, because in my experience, I had like the typical LDS, born and raised, married in the temple, and so I never considered that divorce was even an option. Like divorce, it didn't seem like it was not an option. It didn't seem like it was possible. It didn't seem like it was real. Like divorce wasn't real for me. And so if somebody would have come to me at that time and be like, hey, I'm going to go through a divorce. Do you have any um, anything you can say to help? I would have said a bunch of stuff that really would not have been helpful because I wouldn't have been in that headspace. Now going through it, yes, I have lots of things that I can say that I think would be very helpful for somebody going through a divorce, but that's only because I came to a point where I realized that divorce was an option and divorce is an option. And I came to understand why, and I came to understand when and how to think through something like a divorce. And so there's this conundrum in the church where the people that have the best advice for divorce won't talk about it because it's such a difficult topic, and the people that are willing to talk about divorce have the worst advice. It's crazy. So that's what I'm trying to overcome in this um, multi-part series, is trying to get some good advice out there because there really is just so many misconceptions about what's going on. Okay. Let's see. I've got a bunch of notes I'm looking at on the screen. Okay, so if you're going through divorce, you usually feel very isolated because there's little discussion, there's no guidance. People that have advice don't give very good advice. There are a few people going through a divorce that get the support they need, and it makes a huge difference. But the support that you need is very hard to find because you need basically like the starting place to finding support in a divorce is finding someone who's been through a divorce and is willing to talk to you about it one-on-one. And there are some rules that you have to set up for the conversations, but that is a starting place. It's very rare to find somebody who's helpful in a divorce, but there are lots of those people out there. They're just hard to find. And the rules, quick rules that set up, is the best things to talk about are logistical and legal and kind of the black and white side of divorce. And this, my audience is going to be men. Sorry, I mean, hopefully this is helpful for the sisters too, but I know the male side, and so that's what I'm going to speak to the most. And so different people need different things, but if you find someone who's supporting you by letting you vent, that's not helpful. That's not supportive. Unless you get past that quickly and into a place where you're solving problems and asking questions. But if you have somebody that you're just venting to, that's not good. Many people lack support, feel isolated. Oh, especially since family members and friends are too close to the situation to be objective and helpful. This was mind blowing to me. When I was going through my situation, I was shocked at how unhelpful my inner circle was. And it's not for lack of effort. They really wanted to help, but they wanted to help for all the wrong reasons. And because of that, they gave the worst advice. It was absolutely not helpful to have a family member come and say, well, you guys just need to figure it out. And I would be like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Do you know how to figure it out? And they'd be like, yeah, you figure it out. Can you, yeah. You just need to figure it out. And here, I'll pause it real quick. All right. Going? Okay, sorry, I'm still new to the video stuff. So they would say something like, yeah, you just figure it out. And I'd be like, yeah, how do I do that? And they would like, we'd start brainstorming, and it would be the dumbest stuff. Like, oh, what does your family home evening look like? Or are you guys doing date night? And like, just, oh, well, so much stuff that's just not helpful. Okay, I know you guys are trying to help. Sorry, I need to go find better help. The reason that doesn't work out is because first of all, they don't know how to fix something. But the reason they want to fix it is like all of the wrong reasons to fix a marriage. Like the reason to fix a marriage is to be a better self, be a better person. The reason not to fix a marriage is so that the kids can have the mom and dad in the home at the same time, and so that you don't have to go through the financial struggles of divorce. Like, all of those are superficial reasons to fix a marriage. Not that they're not important, but like, I don't know, it's not the right motivation. As far as motivating your support, family typically is just not going to be able to find the right motivation. Okay. Many people in the church don't fully understand what it's like to be struggling in marriage. This is such a weird conversation because most marriages in the church, the average marriage in the church, is not healthy. The average marriage in the church is transactional and selfish, at best. There are a few marriages that you'll find that truly are healthy, and they shine, and they're just like, wow, how are you guys doing this? And they're the ones that say like, oh, we never fight, and all this stuff. And it is possible, but it's not typical. Healthy marriages are not typical. Marriages in the church are much more healthy than the marriages outside of the church, but the marriages in the church are still not healthy. And so most people in a marriage in the church are going to consider themselves successful, like I did. I thought I was in a great marriage until my marriage fell apart, and I was like, why is our marriage falling apart? Our marriage is awesome. Like, how come this isn't working? And then I got help and started realizing, oh, my marriage is actually terrible, but it's typical, and so I thought it was good. So that's another reason why the church as a whole is not able to help very well with marriages technically, because we all have these kind of average, not good marriages. Okay, another problem with this is that divorce is not seen as an option. Culturally, religiously, it's not given as an option in the same way that it is outside the church. Like, I've had several friends that get married, and they'll say something to the effect of, outside the church, well, if it doesn't work out, that's fine. We'll just get a divorce, just leave, whatever. If it doesn't work out, it's fine. Like, marriage is, it's not that big a deal. It's like buying a car. If you don't like it, you sell it, you get another one. And we definitely in the church, we don't have that view. We're kind of at the other end of the spectrum, where we think once you buy a car, that's the only car that's on the planet for the rest of existence. And neither one of those ends of the spectrum are healthy. Divorce, I'll say this many times, I'm sure, divorce should not be the first option, and it should not be the last option. And if you are married and you haven't thought to yourself, I wonder what divorce looks like, I wonder what it would look like for me, you're not being realistic. Like, you really need to at least play with the idea of what that would look like for you, because it will help you strengthen your marriage. Because typically there's two ways to think about divorce. The first way is that divorce is a trapdoor, or an ejection seat. That's a better way. Divorce is an ejection seat, where you hold on as long as you can, and right before you die, you hit the ejection button, and boom, you're gone. You're out of the marriage, and you're done. And like, oh, that was close. I almost died, but now I'm out of that marriage. Okay, that's the wrong way to look at a divorce. The right way to look at a divorce is that if you have a marriage and you're thinking to yourself, I want to be in the best marriage I can possibly be in. And if I'm not in that marriage, I can always find that marriage outside of my current relationship. I mean, not an affair, obviously, but leave the current marriage and go find another marriage that meets the needs that I have for my potential. Okay, so to elaborate on that, this is way different than an ejection seat. Okay, because in an ejection seat, you're not really contributing. You're just waiting for the plane to hit the ground. Right before then, you just rip it and you're gone. And in this other way, you are actively working on the marriage and trying to figure out how it's going to work. And if you have a partner that has those same goals as you, it will work. It will work. But not all of us have those partners. And so if you have a partner that is not on the same page as you, then you need to be thinking to yourself, is this serious enough that divorce is a better option than staying in the marriage? And I'll give you some more ways to think about that when we get to the dignity stuff. All right. Okay. So it's probably helpful to understand my credentials when it comes to this, so you know exactly where I'm coming from. So I mentioned I filed for divorce. We worked through it. So my wife first asked me to leave the house, and she was like, "You got to figure this stuff out, or I'm gone. Like, I do not want this marriage anymore." And I was like, "Okay, I can figure out what's going on." And so I left the house basically not really knowing what was going on. Got some help, got some ideas, and then went back to my wife after a year and said, "Okay, I think I figured it out. I'm ready. Like, let's try this again." And she basically said no. And then through that process, I finally kind of decided that I was no longer wanting to wait around and see if it was going to work, see if she was interested. I was just going to move on, and I was going to find somebody that I wanted to be with. And so I filed for divorce, and she decided that she probably didn't want a divorce. And so we came together and we were basically tried to come to an agreement of, if we were going to move forward, how would that look? Move forward with the marriage or move forward with the divorce. And through a few months of working on that, we decided, okay, we're gonna try it, and we have very specific goals and metrics and things that we're going after to see, being careful about this, not wasting time. Because like I said, I was so done with everything, and I just wanted to move forward with my life. And we worked very hard. We got through it. I have watched, probably a dozen couples go through divorce very closely, meaning like I'm talking to one spouse or the other. I'm checking in with them on a regular basis. I know exactly why they're getting a divorce. And I've seen, like another 20 couples get divorced that I'm not particularly close to, but I'm tangentially familiar with. So I'm not pretending to be an expert, but I feel like I have something to contribute. So if you're curious what my credentials are, that's what I feel like they are. All right. Check. Okay. So we're taught that marriage is eternal, and we're supposed to endure to the end. This comes with a number of problems, where we feel like if we get a divorce, we have failed and we've abandoned our covenants. And this is so destructive. I'll do a longer part on exactly how this is not true. And everybody's gonna, have different opinions about this. But the covenant situation of marriage is super interesting because we are taught that a covenant is a two-way promise. Well, it's just a little tiny step to go from two-way promise to transactional relationship, where you do this, I do this, I do this, you do this, and we just kind of trade back and forth on the things that we're supposed to be doing. And that is actually not what a covenant is. And transactional marriages are horrible. They're painful. They're so terrible. And I'll go through examples of like taking out the trash and doing the dishes. That's kind of my go-to because I think most people can relate to that. But yeah, that situation does not work. And there's ways to overcome the transactional marriage, and it's hard. It takes practice, but you can definitely do it. All right. So if you get a divorce, do you still have faith? Do you trust God? Is it a lack of trust in God to get a divorce? No. Divorce is often not seen as an option. Delay critical decisions. People stay in unhealthy situations because they feel like divorce is not an option. And the assumption in the church is that all marriages are strong, when often that's not true. All right, so most of the divorces that I've seen, not all of them, I would say 80% of the divorces that I see are someone has determined that they're in an unhealthy relationship for good reason, and they're leaving. And I can say, I completely understand why you're doing this. It makes perfect sense. I don't know that I would make the same decision, but it makes sense. And about 20% of the marriages is where people are just wanting a reset. And they don't really have a great reason for believing that they're in a unhealthy marriage. They just don't want to be in the marriage anymore. And sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's just like childhood trauma stuff. Sometimes they just want to feel young again. Like there's a bunch of dumb reasons, but most of the time it's because people realize that they're in an unhealthy relationship and they are looking for a recovery of their dignity. Okay, and there was a quote that I read, and I'll read it again. I think it's appropriate. This is from President Faust. What then might be just cause for breaking the covenants of marriage? This is referring to, of course, is it appropriate to get a divorce? When is it appropriate to get a divorce? Over a lifetime of dealing with human problems, I have struggled to understand what might be considered just cause for the breaking of covenants. I confess I do not claim the wisdom or authority to definitively state what is just cause. Only the parties of the marriage can determine this. They must bear the responsibility for the train of consequences which inevitably follows if the covenants are not honored. In my opinion, just cause should be nothing less serious than a prolonged and apparently irredeemable relationship which is destructive of a person's dignity as a human being. So we're going to spend some time on that because there's a lot of people in that kind of relationship and they don't realize it. We're a lot of like poking and backbiting and walking on eggshells and don't make them mad and stuff like that. That's all eroding of your dignity. And it can be addressed. Doesn't mean you need a divorce, but you need to see it as a problem because it is a problem. I mean, people live for years, decades in these marriages. They're just miserable. And just like normal miserable. Like one of the telltale signs that you're in one of these relationships and that you're miserable and you don't know it is if you find your wife annoying or if you find your husband annoying. And not all the time, but if you find them annoying like once a day, you're probably in one of these relationships. That's a lot of people. All right. One of the things that helps a lot is clarity and communication and honest boundaries. I'm going to do some conversations about boundaries because most people don't understand boundaries, but basically, a boundary is something that you will or will not do, and you will not require anybody else to do anything. That's the foundation of a boundary. So when I was ready for divorce, my wife said, I want to try again. And I said, okay, we'll try again. But I've put in a little bit of work and I know who I want to be married to. I know the type of person I want to be married to. And here is a piece of paper with the attributes of my wife. Whether that's you or not, I don't really have an opinion as to whether or not I prefer one or the other. It doesn't really matter to me who it is. But this is the attributes of my wife. So I think it would be a good idea to read that and we can talk about it and stuff. And then at some point you need to decide if you want to be this person or and we can try and figure that out. Or if not, that's fine. I really don't want you to be that person if you don't want to be that person. And if you don't want to be, I'll find somebody that does want to be that person, or I'll spend the rest of my life looking for them. It's okay. Like it's and the list of attributes was not obscene. It was not weird. It was very normal things that were specific. And so I gave that to her. She read over it very carefully. And there was a few of them that she was like, well, can I get some clarity? Like, what do you mean here? And then, so we talked through it. And eventually she said, yeah, I am willing to commit. I want to be this kind of person. And she said, I don't know if I'm going to be that kind of person today because some of these things I'll have to work on. But I want you to know that if we're going to try this, I want to be this kind of person because the person you're describing is a good person and I can do things differently. And I was like, yeah, that's great. And we helped her come up with one, and I talked through the things that I wanted to do differently, so on and so forth. So that was super helpful for us. It helped her understand where I was at because I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes to those situations. Communication's hard. Okay. We avoid conflict in the name of being peacemakers, which leads to unspoken resentments and unaddressed issues. Be a peacemaker. And this is, again, it's a skill. Basically, don't take things personally. Give people their space. Don't attack people. Being a peacemaker doesn't mean being passive. Resentment is a red flag for if you feel resentment, you should be able to identify that and then think to yourself, oh, I need to work on that. Not they need to work on that. I need to work on that because resentment will ruin my relationship. Tolerating poor marriages for too long. Okay. Boundaries, expectations, non-transactional marriage. All right, I think we're probably good. Yeah, half hour. Divorce shouldn't be the first option, shouldn't be the last. Okay, so here's a good place to wrap up. Wait. So, one piece of bad advice that you hear is that divorce should only be considered after everything else. It's the last thing you should consider is divorce. This is terrible advice because there's a lot of things that should come after divorce, not before divorce. And abuse is kind of the obvious one that everybody points to. So divorce should never be a thing that happens and then you're like, oh, now I need to get a divorce because I've been a victim of abuse. There should always be the things leading up to divorce up to abuse, and you draw the line and you're like, that's when I get a divorce, therefore you don't have to experience all the stuff that would have come later, which would have been the abuse. The last thing that you can always do before you divorce is wait. You can wait indefinitely. So when people say, like, the last thing you do is divorce, the thing right before divorce that you do is wait. And that's what I did. That's what many of my friends have done. And it's not the right way to think about it. Waiting is okay, but waiting forever and having that be the last thing you do before divorce is not good, because your patience can be easily manipulated. And so I'm not suggesting to rush into a divorce. I am suggesting to be patient and wait, etc., etc. But the idea that divorce is the last thing is just not the right way to think about it. You're setting yourself up for a very long, painful experience if your plan is to just wait. And a lot of people do it, and a lot of people want to do it. A lot of people are very comfortable just waiting it out. I mean, decades of just waiting it out. Like, oh, they'll change, or, he'll be better in the next life, or whatever. I've heard it all. And it's just, it's a long life of pain that is not necessary. And by the way, I probably should have said this up front. I know the divorce is painful. I know it's a disaster. It's a mess. It's terrible. It's emotionally ruining, financially burdensome. It's not fun. But there are many things worse than divorce. There are many marriages worse than divorce. Before my experience, I was talking to a guy who'd been divorced 3 times. And I said, there's nothing better than a good marriage. And he said, ha ha ha, there's nothing better than a good divorce. And I was like, oh, that's cute. And I didn't realize it then, but it made sense to me later. That is very true. There are some divorces that you see where you're just like, thank goodness they got a divorce. Praise the Lord, they got a divorce. And a lot of people after the divorce, they're so much happier. And they wish they would have done it sooner. And the kids wish they would have done it sooner. And they wish they would have done it for the kids sooner. And it's so hard to see that, to see the years that people lose in these painful relationships, all because of culture, stigma, fear. All right, that's good enough for now. So that's kicking it off. If you think that you can help me talk through this, reach out. I don't want to be the talking head, but if I'm the only one willing to talk about it, then that's fine too. All right, see you guys.